the street tree palette. So that can all be found in chapter 3. So chapter 4 is sort of the heart of the private development. This is your mini zoning code right here. Zoning and development standards. It's the regulatory part of the plan. It establishes the zones, the use regulations, the development standards. And this chapter supports the city's 2012 zoning code update by maintaining most of the downtown area as mixed-use zoning. And it actually changed a couple sites to mixed use as well. So it's really supporting your existing zoning as well as your general plan, which designates a large portion of downtown as mixed use as well. As you can see, the sort of mid-toned pink color, that's all the mixed use zone, and that's mostly what this chapter focuses on. This chapter provides specified development standards and design standards for mixed use, and this is where a developer, an applicant, city planners will go to look for those development standards. It's right here in this plan in those pink areas. The other colors that you see are your existing zones, and they refer back to your existing code. In several cases, this plan recommends a few additional regulations, provisions, standards, additions, because it's tailored to downtown. But for the most part, it's referring back to your recently updated zoning code. The development standards are intended to concentrate density that's appropriate for transit-oriented development near the Metrolink station. And a big portion of the development standards are focused on requiring pedestrian-oriented retail frontage along Ramona and Main to help increase the pedestrian activity in downtown. You have some of that already along North Main. But you want to continue that so that there's constantly interesting facades to walk by, expand restaurants, expand retail right in the core of your downtown, so it has a nice walkable feel. So what you would find in this chapter is, I don't expect you to be able to read that, but it has a use table. So this lays out the permitted uses, the conditionally permitted uses in that mixed use zone. It has a development standards table, in addition to a way that an applicant can get a residential density bonus by providing more community amenities than what are required, than the base level that's required. And then this chapter has several illustratives to help support development standards, and these include diagrams related to building setbacks, to stepping back building height adjacent to residential neighborhoods, to some pretty extensive outdoor dining standards to help encourage and further outdoor dining in the downtown. And then these are just some examples. Some of these are in the plan and some of these are what we've shown to the community of the type and scale of development that is permitted under the development standards and design guidelines in the plan. Generally 3 to 4 story mixed use. It doesn't preclude the 1 and 2 story things that are already there. But if a developer was coming in to do infill, it might go up to 3 or 4. You know, with ground floor retail and a building edge on the sidewalk. And these are just some samples of various mixed-use projects, and most of these are transit-oriented projects that are in and around Southern California. Chapter 5 focuses on design standards and guidelines. Community acceptance is really based on the quality of the projects that are coming in and how they look. So if that's lacking, that's going to set the tone for how future projects are received in the community and what people want to allow into the community. So quality development is really mandatory, and that's the purpose of this chapter. This chapter uses a combination of photo examples, computer renderings to illustrate various design guidelines that are both either required or encouraged of the developer, such as siting and orientation of buildings on retail streets, to activate street frontage, plazas, courtyards, outdoor amenities for public spaces within larger projects, walkways and connections in commercial and residential projects. There's architectural guidelines. While it's not prescriptive to architectural style, there are still guidelines related to architecture in terms of building form, articulation, building modulation, roof form, corner design, all that's addressed in the specific plan. We also use diagrams and photos to illustrate the important elements of retail buildings and facades. And then as Mike is going to talk about, as the downtown improves and you get more development, there will likely be the need for a more centralized parking location, maybe in the form of a parking structure. So this sets forth the design standards and guidelines for how a parking structure should look. And then there's also sustainable guidelines for sustainable building features and landscaping. And a fun part of this chapter is we've taken a couple sites, one on Clark and Main Avenue, where we have just done a massing model. This isn't intended to show anything architectural, that illustrates some of the design standards and guidelines in the plan with the annotations to describe how a project could be laid out. And this isn't at all intended to be the only way the site could be developed, and that's made clear in the plan. This is just one way under the development standards and the design guidelines the site could come out. And this happens to be a horizontal mixed-use project with the retail portion fronting Main and the residential back by the neighborhood. We did a similar drawing on Downing Avenue and Central Avenue with a vertical mixed-use project. And again, the annotations refer to some of the key design components when building a vertical mixed-use project. A lot of what you have in downtown as well is good bones. I mean, you've got some great retail buildings going up along Main Street and fronting Ramona. And sometimes nothing needs to be done at all except for maybe a facelift. So this rendering is intended to show, this is along North Main, some of the design guidelines, how they could be applied to existing buildings to help spruce up good things that are already there. So that's also contained in Chapter 5. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Mike to talk about circulation and parking.
Thank you, Jean. Good evening, Commissioners. Pleasure to be here again. I'm just going to take you for a quick spin through the circulation section. There is a lot of detail in there, but just wanted to give you the outline. Really a fascinating situation in Baldwin Park. The specific plan is not only on a transit-oriented district, which gives you the opportunity to put land uses in that are synergistic to transit and walking, but it also builds on the work the city has already done on complete streets and the fact that streets are meant to serve everybody and not just traffic. So as you're very much aware, the city passed the complete streets policy some years ago. We've already prepared a living streets design manual, which you're now implementing on Main, just to the north of downtown. So this specific plan really builds on those things and focuses very much on complete streets to make sure that we maintain convenient access for the automobile, cars. That's important for the economic vitality of downtown, but also focuses very much on enhancing facilities for transit users, for pedestrians, to make the downtown more walkable, and on bicycle facilities to enable people to use their bicycles more. We are not reducing roadway capacity. You'll still be able to drive into downtown and park, but the plan focuses very much on enhancing the environment of the other modes. As we've mentioned, the key part of it is the two key, what we call multimodal boulevards of Ramona Boulevard and Main Avenue. And this diagram here is really key to a lot of the transportation in the specific plan. So Ramona as a kind of grand boulevard, if you will, between Baldwin and the railroad tracks, where significant emphasis on increasing pedestrian amenity. Secondary spine of Main Avenue running north-south. Improving traffic signals for pedestrians in terms of wider, more visible crosswalks at the major locations. Adding a key mid-block pedestrian crossing here between Main and the railroad, and providing a mid-block connection through to the train station. So really enhancing pedestrian access to the train station. I'm not quite sure if you can see it, but the map also shows the idea of an off-street pedestrian network that could use alleys as well as using streets. So there's a lot of pedestrian-oriented improvements in the plan. This just gives you a little bit idea of Ramona, which, as you know, is currently a very, very wide right-of-way with Main Street in the middle and these very large parking areas on either side. And a relatively narrow sidewalk. You can see these diagrams in the document. This shows how it will be transformed. We keep the roadway the same, except we're able to widen the bike lane a little, make it more prominent, add a little buffer strip from the cars to make it a much more pleasant experience for bikes. And by reducing the double parking down to a single parking, still having convenient parking on the sidewalk side by the stores, really enabling almost a doubling of the sidewalk width on Ramona, which is what facilitates this pedestrian boulevard feel and the opportunities for on-street dining. This is a diagram that Gene showed, where we go from this double row of parking, very barren pedestrian environment, to something that's much richer and much more amenable to just strolling, stopping at shops, stopping at restaurants. These are just examples of the off-street network that people could also use if it's a creative use of alleys and spaces between buildings. These are examples from Pasadena, which has done this very successfully. It makes for very interesting walkways through and around downtown. Main Avenue is a little more difficult. You do have a project to the north of downtown, as you know, where you're doing a road diet. It's by no means as certain that a road diet would work on Main in the downtown. Traffic volumes are higher, roadway is narrower. So the specific plan does call for a future consideration of a roadway diet, but it basically says, let's see how it goes to the north of downtown and how successful that is, and maybe that can be continued further south at some point in the future. It is a little narrower as you get towards the Northern Boulevard. One idea that is mentioned that could be done today is the idea of parklets. I'm not sure if you're familiar with this, but this is an idea that's catching on in many cities. It takes an on-street parking space next to the sidewalk and basically makes either the landscaped area to sit in or outdoor dinings. There is protection from the traffic by these barricades, but it adds a little open space and greenery to what sometimes is a very narrow sidewalk. So there are a couple of areas on Main where that could be accomplished today. One intervention that we got quite excited about is the area west of City Hall, as Gene mentioned. Basically do some realignments of this rather twisted, tortuous roadway system in this area. Realigning Sterling with Cesar Chavez, putting a signal in here that cleans up this offset intersection condition. And the idea of maintaining an alley behind these stores for local access and deliveries, but closing this part of Main. We had a lot of discussion as to what this was actually called. I think we ended up calling it Main. But closing this, maintaining access to all buildings, but by closing it, really opening up opportunities for this whole area for a higher and better use. As it turned out, the traffic study may only be able to close it one way eastbound and maintain traffic westbound, but if we do that on the north side here, we still leave a tremendous amount of area for open space and a new amenity for the city. Certainly looking to enhance bicycle facilities and basically trying to get a complete network of bicycle routes through and around the downtown and that connects to the neighborhoods as well. I mentioned widening the bike lanes on Ramona to make them safer and more attractive to bicyclists. We then looked at either a Class 2 bike lane, which is an actual bike lane for bikes, or a Class 3 bike route, which is really emphasizing to traffic that bicycles also use the roadway. In downtown, you don't, except for Ramona, you don't have a lot of width to have both on-street parking and the striped bike lane. We think on-street parking is important for convenience, for people to stop and park on the street to go to the stores. So we're recommending adding a lot of Class 3 bike routes through downtown, as well as additional bike parking for convenience. So this map in the specific plan in this chapter shows the bicycle network, how you could get around downtown with these bicycle routes, but also connecting out to the adjacent neighborhoods so people can ride into downtown on their bikes from the neighborhoods. And then adding, you can't quite see, but there's a lot of P's or B's for bike parking, so that when you get there, you can safely park your bicycle and not worry about it. Obviously supporting transit, you already have quite a bit of transit service downtown, not only Metrolink, but you have regional bus service, you also have local Baldwin Park transit routes, those will all be maintained. As I mentioned, improving access to the Metrolink station and adding amenities at bus stops to make it a better experience waiting for the bus. There are diagrams in the, we took them out I think for a simplified presentation, there are diagrams of transit in the specific plan. There's a section on parking in the specific plan under circulation, and the idea here is to move towards a more effective management of parking. We also need to provide enough parking for the businesses to survive and thrive. We don't want to over-provide parking because we don't want a lot of surface lots taking up area that could be used for higher or better use. So there are parking strategies in the specific plan. Park once is, we mean park one time, and we've created a walkable downtown that people enjoy walking so they can walk to multiple destinations. They don't have to park, visit, drive, park, visit. They can walk around the downtown because it's a much more pleasant environment. Because you're in a downtown with mixed uses, they have different parking needs at different times of day, offices or restaurants. You can allow shared parking, so a single parking facility should be shared by different users at different times of the day. And a number of recommendations to make it more convenient to use the parking and to manage the parking more effectively. And we had identified, as Jean mentioned, this surface lot off of Lawrence Avenue here could be a good location for a future city-owned parking structure. So there's a lot in the circulation chapter. We've identified some of the key points for you that you go in and look for yourselves. I think that's where I hand it back to Jean to talk about infrastructure.
Back to me just for a couple more chapters. I just wanted to outline the last two chapters of the plan. Chapter 7 is infrastructure. We do have a civil engineering firm on the team, JMC Squared, and their role is to look at the utilities, the infrastructure, and make sure it's adequate to support all the future development in the downtown. They look at the maximum built out of the development capacity, which is many, many, many years out. But they're looking at the wet and the dry utilities, and just, you can visit this chapter yourself, but it describes their study. And in short, there's only one area along Bogart Avenue that at build out a water, would need a water pipe upgrade. And that would just happen at the time that is needed. And then they also look at dry utilities. And then the final chapter is implementation. This is an important chapter. The key to this chapter is that it sets forth strategies and an outline for preparing an infrastructure financing plan, which should really be the first step for the city after adoption of a specific plan, is to specifically lay out how things will be financed, how developer share fare gets handled. And this chapter also has sort of this table, which is an economic implementation strategy that focuses on necessary programs and actions, who the lead agency or responsibility would be to handle that action, phasing, is this a short-term, a mid-term, or a long-term action, and then potential funding sources. So that's that chapter, and now I'm going to hand it over to Lloyd to tell you about the environmental impact report.
We're almost at the end. The purpose of the Environmental Impact Report, EIR, is to look at the plan you just saw presented and heard presented, and identify what are the physical effects on the environment that would result from adoption of that plan. And the process started with what's called an initial study, which is an analysis to look at what are the subjects that need to be addressed in that environmental impact report. And so that way the EIR is addressing only those issues that are actually potentially significant within the community. There was a scoping meeting held early this year to take public comment on what issues should be addressed in the environmental document, and a notice of preparation, which is a public notice saying City of Baldwin Park is preparing an EIR, what do public agencies believe need to be in that document, and that was circulated for a 30-day review early this year. The next step is to prepare the draft environmental impact report, and that is the main body of the environmental analysis. A couple things were very important in looking at that environmental impact report. First is that the specific plan that is in front of you today actually proposes less development than is allowed by your general plan. It looks at a more realistic build out of the area, and so in terms of some of the comment letters we'll talk about later, the specific plan is looking at a responsible development, a level of development for the downtown area, and a realistic development as opposed to carrying forward density that cannot really be built. The EIR and any environmental document is based on looking at what are the significant effects. What are the things that require mitigation? And it was identified that all of the effects of the plan can be mitigated to a less than significant level, and there's really only two issues, or a couple of issues, that cannot be mitigated. And this is very typical of infill development in a downtown. Those issues being emissions during construction. And anytime you have construction very close to residential uses, as you would have invariably in the downtown area, just the normal working of a construction site with electrical use, deliveries, will create temporary air quality impacts on the surrounding neighborhood during the period of construction. And that period of construction is very short, it is not a health issue, but the thresholds used by the Air Quality Management District will be exceeded during construction in the immediately surrounding area. We all know what air quality is in Southern California, and anytime you look at a large development area, such as an entire downtown area, and add all of what could occur in the downtown area together, that will exceed the thresholds of the South Coast Air Quality Management District. And so even with all the mitigation measures that are put in the plan, included in the EIR, air quality emissions will exceed the thresholds of the AQMD. That is also typical of any large project area. The third issue is noise during construction. Anytime you have construction right close to an adjacent existing use, it's not like we have a nice big empty field to build out in. Noise during construction will be louder than city standards during the construction period. Now, there will be hours of construction are limited, and so construction periods are limited, and the noise doesn't carry real far, but if you're next door to a construction site, it's going to be loud. And that is typical of development in any downtown, and really not any different than the situation we have right now, with being able to build out their existing zoning and general plan. The draft EIR that was prepared, and that is the larger of the two documents, went out for a 45-day public review period earlier this year. 6 comment letters were received, and of these comment letters, pretty standard kinds of comments coming back. The State Clearinghouse is a letter that says, yes, it was distributed to the State Clearinghouse and the public review period is closed. The Caltrans letter is the one that does raise some traffic issues in relation to the 10 freeway and the 605 freeway. And as part of the traffic study and the final EIR, Mike and the traffic experts looked at the impacts and found that they can all be mitigated or they are less than significant. So the traffic study actually presents a comprehensive analysis of all the traffic that would be created within the downtown area and its effects spreading out to the freeways across 16 different intersections. The traffic study in the EIR analyzes both the land uses that are proposed, as well as some of the reconfigurations of the roadways and the closing of a roadway that Mike had talked about that are shown in the circulation section of the specific plan. The methodology that was used follows the recommendations of Metro. It addresses the LA County Congestion Management Program and is done in the way that traffic studies are done throughout Los Angeles County. The specific plan itself, with its provisions related to traffic, complete streets, bicycle use, transit orientation, essentially includes all the mitigation for the traffic impacts that would result in the plan. So there's really only mitigation measures at 2 intersections, and that is Ramona Boulevard at Main and at Baldwin Park Boulevard, some reconfiguration of the intersection in those locations, and as Mike mentioned, the potential maybe for needing to maintain the one-way access westbound in front of, across from City Hall. In the end, all of the traffic impacts that would result from the specific plan will be mitigated to a less than significant level. And that is testimony to the transit orientation of this plan, because there are very few projects of this size that anybody can stand up in Southern California and say traffic will not be a significant impact of this project. What you will be asked to act on and make a recommendation in relation to the EIR is what's called a final EIR. I had mentioned a draft EIR went out for public review earlier this year, and that is part of the final EIR. The final EIR that you will be asked to make a recommendation as to whether it meets the requirements of CEQA includes the draft EIR that would have had its public review, and a smaller document that is actually called the final EIR, and that is the smaller one that you have. 4 chapters in that final EIR. One is an introduction that explains the difference between the draft EIR that went out for public review and what it is you're being asked to take action on. Chapter 2 includes all of the responses to comments, so all the 6 comment letters and written responses to each of those comments. So where Caltrans raised issues related to freeways and potential impacts on freeways, the final EIR provides responses to those, leading to a conclusion that there are no significant impacts of traffic on Caltrans facilities. Chapter 3 looks at, of the final EIR, includes some revisions that are proposed to the draft EIR as it becomes a final EIR. And Chapter 4 includes a mitigation monitoring and reporting program that identifies how can we as a city, we as a community, make sure that all of the mitigation measures included in the EIR are in fact implemented and the impacts that would result from the plan are in fact mitigated. So that is the environmental impact report that is in front of you.
So that concludes our presentation. I think we've highlighted what we think are the exciting possibilities for the downtown, walked you thoroughly through the plan and the EIR, and now we're all available to answer any questions you may have prior to taking the actions that Amy will guide you toward.
I don't have any question, but I have a couple of comments. I'd like to discuss water, something I know a little about. And here's a simplified explanation of how the system works. The water master sets a safe yield for our aquifer each year, usually between 180 and 200,000 acre feet, which is the amount of water that can be pumped out. Valley County Water District is adjudicated 3% of that yield, which means they can pump their amount of water to be pumped out of the aquifer is 5,400 acre feet. But they actually pump about 9,000 acre feet. So they must lease 3,600 acre feet from other sources. And to make up that difference, that costs the district, the water company, $2.4 million a year for that added water to be pumped out. So any new water usage must be leased at this much, much higher rate. So Chapter 7 deals with infrastructure. This chapter states that there will be 2 areas in the specific plan, and I quote, will have a significant increase in water usage. There is no grandfather clause in the water rates for the old customers. Therefore, we're all going to pay for this high-priced water. All of us. So be prepared. Thank you.
So Amy, if we have any questions, who do we refer them to? You or?
Actually, the consulting team would probably be the best bet.
Okay. With this plan, when would the implementation or when would it start? When are we looking at getting it started? Because I know with the new construction of the facility over here right behind the city hall, that's part of the plan, if I'm not mistaken, correct?
The Rome development, is that what
Right.
you're talking about? That's not part of the plan. That was coming in as a separate application.
Right, that actually came in as a separate application and its own little separate specific plan. However, it does have a lot of the components that you see in this specific plan.
You know, the mixed usage and all that.
Correct.
Okay.
It fits nicely and ties in nicely with the rest of this plan, but that's a separate application. This plan is not a development application. It is setting forth the framework for applicants to come in. That's really what this plan is doing, and it's a long-term plan. Specific plans are typically 20-year plans. So as a developer comes in, they will have to meet the zoning regulations, the development standards, the design guidelines contained within this plan.
Okay. With the design plans that you have to increase the walking or riding or really the availability of the downtown area, what about the existing structures that are there? For example, on Ramona and Main, on the corner of Ramona and Main, most of the shops, the back of the shops are actually facing Main. And the entrances are, inside that, like the mall, or that little corner mall there. So it really is not an attractive, it doesn't draw people in. There's nothing there but the back of the building. So is there something as far as to be discussed in regards to the cosmetics of that, restructuring that or anything like that?
This plan does not set forth a restructuring for that site. It does have development standards and design guidelines that apply, though, to the whole downtown area. Now, if that project were to come down and a new project were to come in, it would need to be designed a little differently. And the design standards would apply still, though, to the frontage along Main and along Ramona for that project. This project does focus a bit on the properties along the front of Ramona on that site, which are separate properties, individual properties. And the idea there is to push back that right-of-way so that you have buildings right along the street edge, the way that you do when you are west of Main, to maintain a continuous Grand Boulevard along Ramona Avenue. But this project does not that's a relatively new project, and this project does not go in and restructure how that project is designed. But if it were to come down, it would follow the new development standards.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I'm just concerned about the little area where you're gonna do, get rid of some parking and allow, right along that business area right there by Ramona, on the right side. Where's the extra parking gonna be located at? If you do away with, you know, extend it, right now we have park on both sides. If you get rid of one side, where are people gonna park? And next one is also the area that you want to close off that one street, make it one lane only, or one way. That area belongs to the city also. Is that going to be a parking lot? The area right in that corner where Main Street, before you hit Ramona to the left, there's a property owned by the city. It's vacant now.
The property across from City Hall, is that what you're
Yeah, the
referring
front,
to?
yeah, on Main Street, on Pacific, you know, or Pacific comes in.
Pacific Plaza?
Yeah, the little corner lot for the car wash. That belongs to the city.
Yeah, or one after that.
They talked about that before.
I believe so, you're talking about this area here.
Correct.
Yes. And Jean can correct me, the specific plan does not say this will be a parking lot. It actually speaks to the idea that this could be an open space and a civic plaza. The answer to your question is twofold. As these parking spaces are removed, and some of these, parking can to an extent redistribute throughout the downtown. There's an awful lot of parking spaces right now in downtown. It's about 2,600 as we count. Not all of them are fully utilized all the time. So there's the real potential for a redistribution of parking and more effective use. Some people we recognize obviously like to park right in front of the store that they're visiting. But as the downtown develops with these guidelines and the enhanced pedestrian environment, experience has shown in other places that people are willing to walk a block or 2 blocks from a parking space because it's a much more interesting environment. The stores actually find they have higher pedestrian volumes in front of their stores because people are able to do this walking. We did identify this surface lot today off of Lawrence Avenue that could be a potential cycling parking structure. And I think that's all, as Jean says, a 20-year plan. One of the recommendations in the specific plan is to look more closely at the parking and develop an actual parking management plan, which a lot of downtowns do in this situation. So we feel that will always be enough parking. Additional parking may need to be added as development is added, but it's very much a parking management issue. But we are coming, we did discuss that in the public meetings. There were concerns about stores who are on Ramona and the double row of parking that will be reduced. But I think the overall benefit is more people on the sidewalks walking more and passing more stores.
Okay, again, before you go, the purpose of closing down that one street we're talking about, what is the purpose of that?
Well, the purpose was, first of all, as we looked at this seems to be a little convoluted street system here, and this just seemed to be a relatively low volume street system, and along with the opportunity of realigning this intersection, so instead of having a dogleg intersection, making it one intersection would be a lot cleaner. And the idea that this offered the opportunity of a public open space on a plaza that would be right opposite City Hall and could become a focal point or a gathering point for the community and really enhance the amount of open space in downtown. I think that was some of the thinking, and certainly, Jean, if you want to add to that, or did we cover the basis? Yeah.
Any more questions, commissioners?
Yes, one thing you brought up in regards to the area about reducing the parking, with the double, on both sides. Okay. In that area, there are quite a few either dentists or eye doctors or you know, medical facilities, where if somebody, should say, does park there, they probably will be there for more than just somebody having lunch or something like that because of an appointment or whatever the case may be. So, is there something in the plans to, say, centralize the medical facilities to allow, let's say, either restaurants or other types of businesses to, again, entice the pedestrian traffic up and down Ramona?
Okay. So, well, land use.
From a land use perspective, storefront medical uses in downtowns tend to deaden the downtown a bit. So generally, when we're trying to revitalize the downtown, we will limit those uses in terms of being able to locate right on those pedestrian frontage areas that are retail and restaurant uses. So that is the intent of this plan, that over time, those medical uses would phase out and would turn over with more retail-focused uses. That's the land use answer to that. I didn't catch if there was a parking question in here.
Well, the parking question was, if, as you indicated, the medical facilities, as you stated, deaden the accessibility of the walkway because pedestrians. So it was a combination of the parking and the usage, because if somebody's parking there for an appointment, they take up that parking space for a longer period of time versus somebody there who's.
Sure, okay, now I see your question, yes. And I mean, I think really at the bottom line, that's a land use question, and yes, the long-term goal is to phase out those uses on the frontage.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I can just add on parking. One of the keys in better parking management in this kind of downtown is making sure that employees don't take the best parking spaces. Because they usually arrive first in the morning and they like to park outside the store they're working in. And by parking there all day, they're basically taking as many as 8 visitor spaces away during the day. So part of what's suggested in the parking plan is kind of encourage employees to park in the off-street lots and leave the on-street spaces for visitors and customers, so there's more availability. Then you get into time management, where you have 1 hour, 2 hour, 3 hour time limits, and there are systems where you can dial in the amount of time you want to stay. So it allows a quick stop for a coffee shop, but if someone's going to be there 1 or 2 hours, then they can do that too. It's all in the management.
Okay. Thank you very much.
I have a concern in regards to the restaurants that are on the south side of Ramona. In particular, I'm looking at King Taco as an example. During their busiest hours, everything along Ramona, from the point of the pharmacy all the way down, I want to say at least halfway down before hitting Maine, is filled with cars. And my concern is that I don't think there hasn't been any consideration for that substantial amount of traffic for that particular restaurant, just as an example. With the new plan taking away that whole entire row on the front end.
Row of parking.
Yes. So this back end where we're thinking of doing the Civic Plaza, it's a good idea, but I really think that the focus should be on finding a parking structure to go in there somewhere that would actually alleviate.
I hear your concern, Commissioner, and we did discuss these some of these issues during the course of the community meetings and in developing the plan. Again, we believe it's a very typical situation in downtowns like this. There is a substantial amount of parking. People may need to walk a little further rather than park really close to the store. And that is a part of the type of pedestrian-oriented plan that the specific plan represents. We would point out this is starting to go a little outside of my area, so Jim will correct me if I start going wrong, but this is a design concept, just an idea for how this space would be utilized in front of City Hall. This would be the street or the alley that would be maintained. And you can see all the way down here, there would be angled parking here that could replace at least some of the parking that was relocated. So we are cognizant of that and try to get additional parking as close as we can. But we think that building on your complete streets concepts and your desire for a transit-oriented district, the idea when you look at other communities in Southern California that are trying to do this, it becomes not just the experience of going to an individual location, but of going to other locations or just strolling around the downtown and enjoying the open space that's created. So it's a bit of a trade-off. It's a doubling of the sidewalk width. It probably makes the dining experience much more attractive if you have an outdoor dining on a much wider sidewalk. So it gets into a series of trade-offs. But we do believe there's sufficient parking in the downtown as a whole to meet those demands.
Good question. Currently, there's still a lot of parking spaces that are currently in existence that are not being utilized, correct? And again, they're not that far from the downtown area. Okay. And you said in that design there that they're, in a sense, removing the one parking strip and you move it to the back of the facility.
If you will,
so you're
right.
not losing,
Right.
losing anything.
One parking strip here comes off of Ramona, but it's actually replaced behind on the other side.
Okay, understood.
Excuse me, is there going to be any controlled parking?
Excuse me, sir?
Is there going to be any controlled parking as far as meters and so forth?
We have not suggested that nor recommended it in the specific plan. Going forward over time, that would be something that the future parking studies and parking management would need to address. That is a major step to go to parking meters. It is not part of the plan as proposed plan.
May I ask another question? Is there funding for any phase of it yet?
Well, first of all, on the funding, there are numerous state and federal grants that the city can apply for. A lot of these elements would qualify for that. Many of the plans that we have done, for example, in Pasadena, we've got about $3.5 million in funding in the Civic Center and in the Playhouse District on the idea of creating pleasant pedestrian walkways to the transit station. Then the same thing in Long Beach, many places. So generally speaking, transportation funding at the federal and state levels, although it's always crest, it's where a lot of the funds are. So I would say the city's been very good on grant applications. I think there's a number of good grant possibilities here. Another really important thing, which Gene mentioned earlier, is to set up the infrastructure financing district as soon as possible, and that will generate funds. And what that does, it has some of the characteristics of redevelopment. When you're capturing the value of the development, you want to do it right away so that you're capturing the value of all this development that comes in. If you wait, you lose out on that value.
One thing that I think the important next step is to really, in moving forward with implementation, is having somebody do a fiscal revenue and cost analysis within the scope of the grant for this project. That was not part of this scope of work, and that's an important next step. And then when that's done, that balances out the revenues that the city gets from all the speculated incoming development versus the public improvement costs. And then you can set up an infrastructure financing plan to determine how those costs are paid for, through private development, through public-private partnerships, through grants. So that's really the next phase of this. And then you can prioritize those public improvements, many of which are obviously bigger, moving curbs along Ramona Boulevard, that's a big one. Many of them are smaller. You could do small things such as putting up banners, which don't cost a lot of money but generate a lot of interest in downtown. So it's really having somebody lay out a fiscal revenue versus cost analysis and then doing an infrastructure financing plan. And what many cities are doing is setting up infrastructure financing districts to help pay for this. They're going to the business owners to set up business improvement districts to help pay for some of the smaller pieces. So those would be next steps in implementation of the plan.
Have we had any nibbles as far as any developers that have seen this design concept, not only for this area, but for the downtown area that has come and said, we'd be interested in beginning to work with us in this area?
My understanding from talking to city staff is yes, but I haven't been involved in those meetings, so.
Okay.
Yeah, yes, we have.
Okay, good.
The allure of having CEQA done as part of this process is very, very enticing to developers because it takes the CEQA component, which is most likely what is litigated as part of development projects, out of the mix because it's already done.
All right, good, thank you.
Back to the question, there's no funding right now. No funding right now. That's up to the staff or the city to look for the funding or it's staff responsibility.
Staff is, yes, that's our responsibility, and staff is always on the lookout for funding. Our public works director's been very instrumental in applying for grants and getting them. Like I believe it was Larry or even Mike that said, grant funding gets very, very difficult, but we've proven ourselves over the years to put together fabulous grant applications and get funded for things like such as this, but in addition to other, projects as well.
Any other questions?
One other question. What would be the process of the time period that it will take to actually widen the sidewalks in front of let's just say, for example, in front of the restaurants?
When we're talking a construction project, I'd say that probably the least amount of time I've seen a sidewalk widening down, presuming like that is like at least a year. You've got to go through engineering drawings, get bids and all that, and that stuff it's not overnight.
But once the actual process starts,
Yeah,
the actual tearing down of the
Okay.
sidewalk,
yeah.
redoing, how long of a time
Do
period
something
would
like
it
that within a year. I might just also point out that in relation to the earlier question, table 8.1 on page 132 does show a list of items in the plan, and then responsibility of city or property owners, or whether it's short-term, ongoing, long-term, and then some grant sources. So some broad overviews of the things we just mentioned are actually in a table in the plan.
Anything else for the staff or commissioners? Okay, we'll close this section. Let's go on to staff area reports that you report on.
I need a motion and a second on the resolution that's being presented. And open up the public hearing.
Open to the public hearing now, if anybody wants to comment. See Seeing there's no interest, we'll close that. Yeah, I want to hear a motion to approve the resolution. I hear a motion.
That would be PC 15-14.
I motion to approve PC 15-14.
I second it. All in favor?
Aye.
Motion's adopted.
PC 15-14 adopted 5-0.
Any reports of officers?
No, Chair, but what I'll do is I'll just move on to commission and staff communications. The third item on the agenda is a verbal update on the Vineland Residential Care Facility located at 3562 through 3576 Vineland Avenue. I've been informed that the settlement agreement has been signed by Eastern Keystone, which is the property owner / developer of the property, and that document is now awaiting the mayor's signature. So that's where we are on that one. I'm sorry?
That means we lost.
No, it was a settlement agreement.
Yep. Who's paying?
I don't have the details on that. The next item is a verbal update on the proposed Irwindale Materials Recovery Facility and Transfer Station. The location is 2200 Arrow Highway and the applicant is Athens Services. I've been informed by the city of Irwindale that we, the city, should start seeing some movement by the city of Irwindale in January, February of 2016. What that movement is, I don't know. I'm assuming they're going to go back and look at the comments on the environmental impact report and see how they want to move forward. So, the last item under commission and staff communications is an update on the proposed resumption of mining and subsequent reclamation of the Olive Pit, which is bordered by Olive Street, Azusa Canyon, Los Angeles Street, and Park Place. It's my understanding that the city of Baldwin Park and Irwindale are still negotiating back and forth, so. And that is all I have at this time.
Do I hear a motion for adjournment?
Motion.
I'll second it.
Meeting's adjourned.